Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar today. This is Basic Budgeting for Open Call 2018 Round 2. Thanks for joining us. My name is Dave Eisenberg. I'm the Senior Director of Production here at ITVS. I'm really looking forward to running through some tips and tricks that'll help you put together a great application budget and hopefully help you along the way into and through our application process. Like I mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Production here. My job entails both co-managing this process for selecting applications or evaluating applications and running the call. I'm also in charge of the team of producers here at ITVS that works with funded shows from the time they get in the door to the time that we deliver them to the hungry audiences of public television. A little bit about what we're going to go through today. We're going to be talking specifically about budgeting in the context of the open call application. So we're going to get into some general stuff, just a little bit. You'll find a lot of the general information for budgeting pretty basic here, but we really want to make sure that everybody's working with a good foundation. We're going to talk about a little bit about the budgets that you'll need to put together through the application process, some guidelines that are specific to working with ITVS that are very important and will help you put together a budget that'll work best with your application then going forward in your relationship with us. We'll talk a little bit about putting them together at the very end and some things that are helpful reminders for folks that have been putting together budgets for a lot of years or also maybe working on their first budget here. So we'll just launch straight into it. Before we start, though, it's really important to kind of frame the context of a lot of what I'm going to be speaking to you about in terms of ITVS's policies and also our standards for maintaining financials for projects really is informed by the fact that we are entrusted with distributing public money to filmmakers to work on shows for public television. Because of that, we have sort of a heightened level of, we feel a heightened level of accountability, specifically about, not only about the editorial content of the films that we work on, but specifically about how money is going. It's really important to us that we are being good custodians of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's money and that we are helping you help us in that very important mission. So keep that in mind. A lot of what you're going to hear about how we review project financials and what we're looking for may rest on a foundation of a higher level of transparency than maybe you're used to working with at other places. But it's all to support a very, very important goal, which is our ability to continue being this conduit between the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the independent filmmaking community. All right. And just a little bit before we launch into just some housekeeping, I am going to be taking questions. I have some folks on my end helping moderate these, so I may not get to your specific issue, or if you're asking the same question as somebody else, I may answer one of your questions and not the others. We'll talk about how to get more information at the end of the program. I'll also sort of be not answering questions as I go, but pausing at a few points during the program. So anyway, let's start with some budget guidelines for putting together an open call budget. Obviously we what we're going to be asking of you in terms of putting these budgets together is probably what you're already doing as far as planning for your production process. But there are a couple of things that, because we're working with public money and because of some of our responsibilities to the folks that we're accountable to, are specific policies that we need to follow when we're putting together budgets for open call. The first thing that you guys should be aware of when you're putting together your budget, and actually through the application process in general, is that ITVS's money is not a grant. We're offering you a production license fee that you're going to be using to support your costs of production in exchange for a certain set of rights that you're going to be providing to us. Most importantly is the U.S. TV rights, because our goal is to put your film on public television. We're actually mandated to deliver everything that we fund to public television in one form or another. So your U.S. television rights must be available. If they're not, you can save yourself a lot of headache because our application is pretty long and ultimately we won't be able to fund your film. So US TV rights, we'll talk a little bit more about the additional stuff that gets wrapped up with those rights in our deal later on. That's the big one. We're also entering into a long-term relationship with you. When you get funding from ITVS, we're not only going to be working with you around your financials over the course of production, both to make sure that we're set up with a good budget at the beginning, and then that we're doing ongoing financial reporting to make sure that we're, being smart about progressing through our production plan with you. But after you're done delivering to us, ITVS does take a revenue share in your film. So you will have ongoing reporting responsibilities for us that last for a period of about 15 years, for 15 years after you deliver to us. Because of that, and because of our revenue share stake, we're looking for a budget that covers the full life cycle of your project. That means from the very beginning of development all the way to whatever it's going to take to deliver your show to public television. Make sure that you're putting together a completion budget. What do I mean by that? You basically should assume that you have limited opportunities to revise this budget after you put it into your application. Like, you really should be putting in a budget into your application that you'd be comfortable working with for the life cycle of your project. You will have a little bit of room during the process to make changes, and I'll talk about that when we go through the types of budgets you'll need to prepare for us. But basically assume that you guys are putting together the costs, like a set of costs or cost projections that you'll need to follow from now until delivery. Your license fee is going to be based, what we offer you as far as support to your film is going to be based on what your ask is as determined by the budgets in the application. That's why they're very important. Also, you want to make sure that you're limiting what you put in our budget to the cost of the television version only. So there are going to be costs of, you're going to want your film to go to festivals potentially. You're going to want it to be distributed theatrically. There's going to be outreach promotion. You may have a great engagement campaign planned around your film. Those are examples of costs that should be kept out of the budget that you're preparing for ITVS. We want hard costs of production for a television version only. And do your homework. Make sure that estimates that you're putting into your budget and your ITVS application are based on current information, quotes that you've received recently from vendors that you're pretty sure you're going to work with. Now's the time to do sort of your researching and forecasting, not after we've made an offer to begin working with you on a contract. Okay. Another couple of things to keep in mind, getting some of the rules out of the way here first. We don't allow deferred expenses in your application, your budget with ITVS. This is because of requirements that are imposed on us by our funder. So all of your past costs need to be costs that are paid. No IOUs, no in-kind costs. Those are the sorts of things that you should keep out. However, if money has actually changed hands from you to somebody else, that's the kind of stuff that we really do want to see from very first dollar. And this includes your salary. We are going to be looking at a salary amount. When you put in a salary amount in your budget, make sure that you're not estimating what your sweat equity would have been, but where you're talking about costs that you've actually, or checks that you've actually written to yourself, if there's any past salary in there. All right, and we talked about hard costs only. Another thing we're going to talk about a couple of times in this presentation is the importance of backup and auditability for your financial records. We do want to make sure that all of your past expenses that you're putting into your budget are substantiated by invoices, receipts, actual paper records. Like I said, no IOUs and no best guesstimates. Okay. Moving forward, so what are the types of budgets that you're going to need to prepare for to support your open call application? You're really going to be doing 2 budgets for us at different points in the process, depending on how far that you progress. The first that everybody's going to fill out is the budget that you're probably working on now, which is the summary budget that's contained in our online app in the WiseHive system. So basically what we're looking here are bottom line totals and subtotals for most of your major production categories, expense categories, and also secured funding. We're going to talk about sort of what that means in just a second. But just keep in mind that this online, even in this online initial application or initial budget, you're looking at needing to fill in information with multiple questions in multiple sections. I'll unpack that in just a second. Provided that you make it through the first phase of selection, we're going to reach out to you again for an updated budget. And like I said, this might be your opportunity to include further budget research that you haven't done yet, though I do recommend making sure that your first budget is as close to what you would need to complete the show as possible. But you will have sort of this additional opportunity down the line. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward, but 2 budgets are part of the application. So talking about the first budget, your summary budget in the online application, just unpacking that for you for a moment. First thing you're going to want to fill out is your secured funding. This is money that you've either already received or money that is committed to your project, like you've already signed a contract or a deal and you're just waiting for the money to hit your bank account. That's how secured it needs to be. If it's sort of something that you feel you're going to be really competitive, an application that you have out that you feel you're going to be really competitive, that's good, but it's not secured, nor is like a list of people that you plan on approaching for funding in the future. This is really stuff that is already in your bank account or on its way there. You can put some of that other information. It's very important for us to know what your fundraising plans are. Anything that's not secured, you should list here in the pending funds section of the online application to this level of detail. We kind of leave it up to you in terms of what format to put this in, but we really do want to know the amount that you expect potentially from these pending funders, and also if there's a notification deadline. That's important information for us. So please include it here in this open section. So secured funding. The next section that you're going to fill out is the expenses. And like I said, in the online application, we're only looking for sort of big production category subtotals. So it may be helpful for you to, if you have access to our template, or if you worked on an ITVS project before, to sort of use that as a workbook at this stage and you bring those subtotals over. Or if you're working with sort of different categories, basically what we are looking for here are your major categories of production and those kind of big ticket subtotals, because it's really important for us to have these estimates well figured out from you, because the application does a lot of the math for you. You'll notice that the ITVS request, essentially what your application is saying you're asking for from us, is going to be automatically calculated by subtracting the secured funding amount that you list in the first section from the expense total as the application calculates it from the second section. It's really important that you do as much research as you can before submitting this application, because you're not going to be able to manually enter a request from us. We really are looking for what is it going to take to get you over the finish line. Good question here that came up. Do we fund projects that have no prior funding support? So are we ever first money in? Open Call is a completion funding initiative. So our goal through this initiative is to give you the money to consider some films that are at earlier stages of production because they either speak to our mission very well, or the subject matter is really compelling. What I would encourage you guys to do is just to be completely transparent and honest about how much support your film has actually received and how much you think that the film is going to take to get over the finish line. Will not necessarily disqualify you if ITVS can't complete your budget. However, it is something that we sort of keep factor into the consideration. All right, so your line item budget. If you're lucky enough to make it through the first round of our application process, we're going to reach back out to you in about a month or two or so and ask you to fill out our detailed line item budget using our template. This is an example of just one section of it here, but just as to give you a sense of the level of detail that we're looking for. We really do want to see not only what your spent to date amount, at this point we're going to want to see how much of your subtotals, how much of the bottom line totals that we've already reviewed are spent to date money. So how much have you already sort of expended, and what part of that is an estimate to complete. So we're going to really take a look there to see where you are in production, as far as how much of the amounts that you're saying you need are already out the door and how much is a projection. We're also going to want you to do a breakdown of, we're also going to want to see sort of some detail about units and rates to help inform our evaluation of your project. So you should be prepared with that information should you get to the next stage. And this is really where having done your research is very critical, because at this point, when we get a line item budget from you, you should assume that you're going to have very limited opportunity to revise it if we do select your film for funding. And we are also going to base our offer to you as far as funding from this budget. So this is really kind of where the rubber meets the road. You're going to want to make sure that your research is done by this point. Okay. So how do you do it? We talked a little bit about we've up to this point talked about some of the rules of the road, talked about the budgets that you're going to have to prepare. And now we're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about best practices. I think it's important for everybody to get a refresher on the basics occasionally. So what are budgeting fundamentals? How do you put one together? And what I always encourage people to do is to start with the plan that you are putting together for your film. You've got all the information you need to start honing in on your budget really from the first day that you start pre-production or start conceiving your show. And really we're going to want to see, as you put together your application materials, a set of materials that feel like they talk to each other, right? So you're going to be putting together a proposal. You're going to be putting information into our online application. You're going to be putting together a work sample, and we're going to be looking at your budget. We're going to want to see the plan that you set out in your online application and proposal well reflected in your budget. Your budget is going to should be telling the same story as the application and the treatment that we're reviewing. If we feel like there is one film described by the plan and the treatment or proposal and another sort of thought about in your budget, we're going to take that into account when we're evaluating your application. So, starting from the ground up, the best place to start when you're thinking about your budget is with your treatment or your proposal, kind of the treatment or script that you're working with right now. You should have a concept of what story you want to tell and how you want to tell it to some level of detail, and that really can provide you with like the wish list of what you need to complete the film. You know what characters you need to interview. You know what what archival materials you think will help tell this story. All that stuff should be part of the treatment that you are putting together for us and part of the script that you are working with to plan the film. So you do have sort of an idea. You can start from those details and extrapolate. Well, gosh, we're going to need to go down to this state or this city in this state 3 times to interview this person or follow this process. So those are the sorts of details that begin to inform your cost estimates. And then after that, you're going to need to sort of think about, after you know what that scope of work begins to look like, or the things that you're going to need to sort of plug into your film, think about how long it's going to take to make that stuff happen. And my advice, the advice that I give filmmakers most often, is to not think not just about sort of what your benchmarks are in this schedule, like, oh, we want to get to rough cut by July. By July, we want to be in mastering by October, and so we can get into festivals in the fall. Think about the specific time frames that you think the work is going to require, because all of those units of time, all those little pieces of the project have implications on cost. The other thing that you should be thinking about, and I'm not going to talk too much about here, is what's in your show Bible. And it's kind of a squishy thing to talk about, but really what I'm talking about here are any of the commitments or agreements you've already entered into, whether they're releases or distribution deals or co-production agreements that you've already agreed to that might put a box around your process, because all these things may influence what you're actually able to do with the footage or materials you've acquired, and how long it might take to make the process. Like, are you committed to deliver somewhere else at a very certain time? These will all inform your budget. Then the work is really to make sure that all of those other pieces of your project plan are speaking well to your budget. The way you do that is by actually doing your homework. So once you get sort of some time frames for the work established, once you understand what it is you're going to need to put in your film, you need to get on the phone and you need to start calling people. And like I said, now is the time to do that, not after you've been greenlit for funding, to double check and make sure these estimates are right. You really want to be making sure that you are thinking about updating your estimates for post-cost, crew rates. If there are specific archival materials that you know are going to be critical to making your film work, what's it going to cost to clear those things? And what is it going to cost to clear them for the rights that are necessary to deliver to public television? Once you have all that information, the math is pretty simple. How many things you need, what those things cost, and if there is a time component, those costs are going to need to be repeated over a period of time. You can just put all that together, and that's how you come up with your budget estimates. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but I think for people who are just starting out and maybe are putting together their first budget or have had somebody else do it on other projects, it can be easy to get intimidated by the fact that either the math involved or what they feel is sort of what you guys might feel is the overwhelming task of taking into account every little piece of what makes a film, what's going to make your film go. If you have a solid plan, though, and you kind of have a clear sense creatively of what you want to do in this film and can articulate what the story is that you want to tell well, I think you'll find that you have all the basics necessary to put together a good budget. That said, there are some tricky bits that people usually, I see are common stumbling blocks for folks, especially when they're putting together their open call applications. So we're going to go into that next. Things you should ask yourself at this point as you're putting together your open call budget is, what is your plan for distribution? Not only who are you committed to delivering to now, but ideally, what do you want to do for this film? What do you want to do with this film over its life cycle? I mean, obviously, if you're working with us, we're going to be a big part of or the only part of your television plans for North America and the United States territory. However, that doesn't mean that this film can't have a life in festivals, in theaters. You may want to do distribution online. Think about all that stuff now, so that you know that you're putting together a plan that's going to support those distribution plans. The other thing to keep in mind is formats and media. You really should understand your technical workflow at this point, from now or from the beginning of production all the way through delivery. And if you don't have that expertise yourself, you should bring somebody on or get the advice of somebody who does have that expertise. Because those things are going to have huge implications on your costs, and small mistakes that you make early can really bite you farther down farther along in the process. These are the two most consistently under budgeted categories that we see in project budgets, and I would say 80% of the time it's because either the filmmaker hasn't thought out their plan for production in detail, or they haven't done their homework and actually called and gotten quotes. So you really should be thinking about now as you go along, if you're bringing in third-party materials, what markets are you going to need to clear those materials for? And what are the costs associated with those? Does it make sense to clear, does it make sense to clear all of those rights at once, or are you going to need to work out a strategy to kind of clear them in steps? And then with post-cost, big questions are, what am I going to be bringing into this film and from what sources? And what are the costs associated with converting all those to a format that's going to be acceptable for broadcast? And then what are the tech specs that I need to hit as you master for wherever you want to deliver the film? Those are all essential parts of your workflow that people often overlook, but have some serious cost implications. So that's why we really do suggest having an early consultation with a post provider who you might want to work with, and just talking them through your project plan. There's a lot that can come out of a quick consultation with someone early on that can save you a lot of money later. Okay. So answers those questions for ITVS. You're going to be needing to deliver to us 4 years of your U.S. broadcast television rights. That's sort of the core rights deliverable. In addition to that, broadcasters are taking a lot more streaming rights than they used to. We, in our template contract, asked for 42 days separated into 3 windows of free streaming plus 14 days of MVOD. But that's just sort of the baseline. The rights that different distributors within public television, when we get to the point of sort of working with a broadcaster, can vary widely. So just know that free streaming is now increasingly part of what broadcasters are expecting, some sort of catch-up window when you deliver a show for broadcast on television. The other thing to sort of keep in mind that people often forget is that you do need to deliver your film. We do need to be able to promote your film. So especially when you're thinking about archival materials, if you have a heavily archival film, thinking early on which materials that you are bringing in are going to be useful to us and to you for promoting the film, and making sure that you are clearing those appropriately. And also, we take an institutional promotional right, which is basically the ability to use your film internally to advertise that we've been involved with it. This generally doesn't require additional clearances. As far as delivery to public television, this is a little bit out of date. We are still asking for HD cam masters in our template contract. However, a lot of broadcasters are switching to, and I think by the time, if you have a film in production now, by the time you deliver, a lot of broadcasters will have already switched to tapeless delivery. So that is definitely on the horizon. However, the public television world moves a little bit slower than I think broadcast at large. So we do still ask you to budget for those tape masters. In addition, you should plan on delivering to us and your broadcaster both texted and textless versions of your show. It's really important, especially if your broadcaster is packaging your show for you or doing a broadcast QC, that textless version of the show, as well as audio stems, your audio stems, will help them make fixes prior to broadcast. In addition, we're going to want information from you about what materials in your film are cleared or not. And if you have a trailer, that's usually useful to a lot of series that we work with. So they'll ask to collect that. The PBS Technical Operating Specifications, the TOS, is available on their website. And these are the technical specs that are used almost universally in public television. I would highly suggest you guys go to their website. You can search for PBS TOS and it'll take you right there. Download those and take a look at them, because that will give you, especially if you're talking to a post house, that'll give everybody a sense of what tech specs they're going to need to hit. All right. Take a look at the questions here. I think I talked about a question about tape delivery. In-kind costs. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but in-kind costs can't be calculated as part of your open call budget, so you'll need to leave those out. Occasionally in your proposal or people's proposals, if there has been a lot of in-kind support, that's something that people note in their project plan. But for a variety of reasons, we actually can't include those in our calculation of what the budget of the film is. Deferrals. We actually, because of the way that we need to account in the sort of public television in the public television space, deferred costs can't be included in budgets. It's the same sort of, for the same reasons as in-kind expenses can't. So we see this a lot with films where someone's been working on a film for years, and they have sort of not been able to pay themselves a salary, or have racked up a bunch of IOUs with to their other vendors, to vendors. Those aren't things that can enter into our budget, nor can you include them as costs going forward. However, filmmakers have often been creative because there are other costs that are going to go into, like your engagement campaigns and production for other versions. Occasionally, filmmakers find a way to shift those costs onto those other budgets, but unfortunately, they can't be part of ours. All right, great. Well, we'll keep moving forward. So things not to forget. This comes as a shock to a lot of people, but it's a dangerous world out there. And when you start working with someone like ITVS, who has a responsibility to some high-profile folks with deep pockets, we are going to expect you to carry insurance for your business and also for the production that'll protect us. The two most important of these are, of course, errors and omissions. We're going to make you take an E&O policy out prior to any distribution of the film. The quotes are easy to obtain from insurance brokers, and usually for anything but the most high-risk films are pretty reasonable. However, it is something that you do need to make sure that you're budgeting for. Also, general liability for your film, especially if you are still in active production, is really essential. Make sure that you are appropriately researching costs that are going to be associated with your clearance strategy. I know a lot of filmmakers rely on fair use as a way to get access to materials, especially for films that are like social issue driven. There is a big carve out there that the law allows. However, fair use is not free. There are a lot of legal costs that go into a fair use clearance strategy that you should really be aware of before you build your budget, if that's the route that you're going to go. Especially since you're going to need to make sure that your film is insurable at the end of it. So yeah, I mean, usually that work involves working with an attorney to make sure that your strategy is actually a sound one and qualifies for sort of using these materials under fair use. That involves a lot of review of the project by your production attorney, and also can require them to produce documents like opinion letters and things like that. So there are costs associated with that, and it's something that you should keep in mind. Also, press materials. In addition to photos and the raw outtakes, other clips that might be useful in promoting your film series to be interested in, like I said, if you are clearing third-party materials and you have a heavily archival film, the costs associated with those promotional clearances are things that are important to sort of factor in. If these are additional clearances that are going to help you do clear materials for promotion on public broadcast, they can be part of your public television budget. So that is sort of the one exception to the no promotional costs rule. Questions about that? So does ITVS cover clearances for archival footage and music for festivals or for other distributions? We don't. However, we also one price. We consider that whole price of clearing the materials that you need part of the production cost of the public television version. We're not going to make you take a bad deal and negotiate separately for rights, a your television rights, your theatrical rights, your festival rights, all in pieces, because that's not fiscally responsible for us. Most people find that it's more efficient to bundle, and we're totally fine with that. All right. Next. Make sure you don't forget your salary going forward. This is really important, and I think especially in light of sort of what we can't do as far as including the deferred cost of your labor going up to this point, making sure that you're paying yourself fairly going forward is really important. Your attention and focus deserve compensation, and we actually are going to depend on you being able to compensate yourself in a way that allows you to complete the film. So we don't think it looks bad for you to pay yourself, a reasonable market rate salary going forward. And, keeping in mind the fact that you're probably going to be working on the film for a bit longer than you initially project is important too when sort of factoring in those costs. But we can only pay for salary going forward. So whatever you're budgeting for yourself in this budget needs to be reasonable given the scope of work that you're proposing. All right, so financial records. This is sort of the last section of stuff that I want to talk about, and it's really important for us is, how do you set yourself up for success in terms of communicating where you are financially in the film and communicating, providing a record of where all the money that you're spending on this film is going. It's really important that when you set up your budget, that you are setting up a chart of accounts that you're going to use consistently through the life cycle of the project, or at least from the point that ITVS comes on to the end. What is a chart of accounts? It's literally the order that you group everything in your budget. That's it. The chart of accounts, the organization scheme that you use in your budget, it's really important that that corresponds to whatever computerized accounting software that you're going to be using moving forward. ITVS does require you to provide us with a general ledger once you get into production that is generated from industry standard accounting software. We highly prefer QuickBooks because it is sort of the industry standard for small business, and it spits out the reports that we need pretty easily. So making sure that you are also budgeting for a bookkeeper or someone to help you set this up if this sort of financial record keeping is not in your wheelhouse is really important. We need you to keep detailed financial records. We need to review those from you throughout the course of production, because there are certain things that ITVS can't pay for, and there are certain things that ITVS can't allow in the budget altogether. If you do move into contract negotiations with us, we can get into those in greater depth, but just know that we are going to need you guys to sort of move in this direction if you get recommended for funding. This is an example of a ledger that is formatted correctly, and you can see the types of information that we're going to need for all of the expenses that are included in your budget is really importantly when the expense occurred, who received the money, what was it for, and how much was it. Those are the real key pieces of information that you should be ready to provide. Because of that, it's important for you, now that you'd be moving into potentially a production relationship with ITVS, to make sure that you are getting together all of the financial records that you've generated up to this point in production on your film. And this includes all the stuff on this slide. Bank statements, canceled checks, receipts, general ledgers or other check registers, statements from your bank accounts. Having this stuff available and organized is going to help you put together an accurate budget for us, but it's also going to help make sure that you're protecting your own investment in your film. Okay. ITVS does allow filmmakers to recoup in first place. I mentioned we have a revenue share. Any prior unreimbursed out-of-pocket expenses that are production costs related to this film. So that means everything from that first cup of coffee on your first scouting trip, all the way up to the editor that helped you edit your work sample for Open Call. If those aren't supported by other funding sources, if you're not spending grant money that you have already received and that's coming out of your pocket, you'll have an opportunity to recoup that out of your revenue for the film before we start sharing. And in our revenue share calculation, money that you spend on your own film offsets our equity. So that's why it's really important for you to protect your own investment in your film, to have detailed records of what it is that you've spent on production so far. Okay. Finally, other things to consider before we get to some questions again. ITVS is going to ask you to maintain a separate bank account for this project. It's just for ease in reconciling your production financial records with the financials you're delivering to us. We are going to ask you to work with a bookkeeper because we are going to need you to be working in a accounting software that is set up for small businesses. And that needs to be organized in the same way as your budget. And we are going to be doing financial reporting with you going forward. So that's the end of the program here. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the list of questions. Question about marketing funds or marketing expenses. Yeah, so we do ask you in, I think it did show a slide where we had a budget that said a photographer, a budget line for a photographer. You can include, you have to separate out any costs of publicity that's not related to the public television version of the film. And really, most broadcasters are going to assume a level of promotion for your broadcast. So what you need to be able to provide to broadcasters is the raw materials. So like I said, that's outtakes, behind the scenes footage, production stills, descriptions of the film, your bio. The cost of producing those materials that are the raw materials that a series will eventually use to promote your broadcast, those are okay to include in your production budget. Anything that is going to support another version, and that includes a website, a publicist, somebody to help you with your festival publicity, that stuff needs to be carried on a separate budget, but you should be keeping close track of that because there are ways that those costs can offset your revenue share obligations to us, but I'm not going to get into that here. Okay. All right, and then finally, the deferred cost question has come up a couple of times. So just to be clear, if you've been working on your film for a while and you haven't actually paid yourself or haven't been able to pay yourself, then yeah, the sweat equity, the value of that sweat equity is not something that you can reflect as a dollar amount in your application budget or your production budget with ITVS. However, if you have been able to write yourself checks, you've received money from other sources, if there's actually been a payment made to yourself, then that's the kind of salary that can show up in your budget as a spent-to-date cost. All right. And about the bank account, yeah. We're not going to retroactively require you to separate everything into a separate bank account for the project because we can't do that. However, going forward, just be prepared. You are going to need to open up a separate bank account for the project. All right, great. Looks like that's it. Thank you guys for your attention. Thanks for tuning in today. I know we covered a lot of information. If all that's still rattling around in your head, you haven't been able to sort of digest it, I have put my email here up on the screen. Feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to answer questions. I wish you guys the best of luck. This is, for a lot of people, one of the more daunting parts of the application. So we do really respect the work that you guys are putting into it, and we want to set you up for success. So hopefully this has been an informative session for you. And yeah, best of luck preparing your applications. I really look forward to seeing all your films.